Growing potatoes is easy, fun, and very satisfying. And the best thing about growing potatoes is that they are relatively easy to grow and they're practically maintenance free. I'm Jag Singh, this is Daisy Creek Farms, and without taking any more of your time, let's cover the complete guide on growing potatoes. After watching this video, you're going to be a master in growing potatoes. And let's start with first creating our seed potatoes. Now you can use your grocery store potatoes to make your seed potatoes. However, that does come with a little bit of a risk of disease. Now, if you want completely disease-free potatoes, you can buy seed potatoes that are actually certified disease-free. Now, for years, I've been buying grocery store potatoes to create my seed potatoes, which are a fraction of a cost as compared to seed potatoes. And I haven't had any issues so far, knock on wood. It's very easy to create your own seed potatoes from grocery store potatoes. You have to sprout them or chit them, and this is how you do it. Buy organic potatoes from the grocery store because most conventional potatoes are sprayed with growth suppressants. Do not use potatoes that have cuts or bruises because these can harbor disease and fungus. Individually wrap the potatoes in damp paper towels. This provides humidity to the potatoes. Add the potatoes to a perforated bag. This allows airflow, and then add a full onion in the bag. The ethylene gas from onions makes the potatoes sprout. That's why they tell you not to store potatoes with onions. However, in this case, we want them to sprout. Place the bag of potatoes right next to a window that receives indirect sunlight. After 2 to 3 weeks, this is how the potatoes look like. They have really nice and healthy sprouts, and the seed potatoes are ready. Now, you don't really have to sprout or chit your potatoes to plant your potatoes. You can plant your potatoes directly in ground even though they don't have the sprouts or chits on them. However, those potatoes are going to be 2 to 3 weeks behind the potatoes that are sprouted. So it helps to sprout them first indoors and then plant them outside to get a head start on growing potatoes. And now let's prepare our seed potatoes for planting.
But the very first thing you want to know is whether you can plant your potatoes whole or whether you want to cut them. And there's a very simple rule to that. The potatoes have to be big enough to cut. So if they're more than 2 ounces, which is about 50 grams, you can cut them in half. However, if they're smaller than 2 ounces, you must plant them whole. So let's look at some examples. Now here I have some seed potatoes. Make sure your seed potato chits look like this. And they do not look like this. This is a result of chitting your potatoes in dark. And these were looking for lights, and that's why they became very spindly. Now this is similar to having leggy seedlings. Well, this potato will grow and produce a potato plant. It might not be as strong as the plant produced by this potato. So here are 4 examples. I have 2 potatoes that are bigger than 2 ounces and 2 that are smaller than 2 ounces. Now these 2 big potatoes, one of them has chits all over the potato, while the other one does not. And these small potatoes, one has chits all over, while other one only on one side. So let's go through these. Now the very first potato that is bigger than 2 ounces and has chits all over, we can cut this in half. So let me cut this in half. And there you go. So we're gonna keep one chit on one side and it has no other chits, and the other half has actually more than 2 chits. So the rule of thumb is that each half of the potato can only have maximum of 2 chits. Even a whole potato should only have just 2 chits, no more. So let's remove all the chits from this potato. There you go. So you have to go deep enough to remove the chits so that they do not grow. Otherwise they will try to grow as well. And look at this one. So let's get rid of this too. And now we are left with one half with only 2 chits and another half with only 1 chit. And this is exactly what we are looking for. Now here's a big potato with only 1 chit. However, this 1 chit is also trying to grow 4 different plants, but it does not have any other chits on the other side. So there is no reason to cut this potato. Even though it is producing this kind of chit, we are going to get rid of it because we are only going to have maximum of 2 chits. So any other little chits like this, we are going to get rid of. Now out of these 4 chits, let me remove 2. So I'm going to take off this one and this one. There you go. Now here's a smaller potato with 2 large chits and many smaller chits. So we are going to keep the 2 large chits and we are going to remove any other smaller chits. And we are not going to cut this potato in half because it's not big enough to cut in half. So let me remove this chit as well. There you go. I don't see any more chits on this potato. So this is ready to go. Now here's a smaller potato that has chits all over. Now your inclination is just to cut it in half and use both half of the potato. However, this potato is just way too small to cut in half. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep two large chits, two healthy chits, and we are going to remove any other smaller chits on it. There you go. Now if you have a whole potato or a cut potato, the rule of thumb is to have maximum of 2 chits. Doesn't matter if it's a whole potato or a cut potato, because if you have more than 2 chits, if you have chits all over the potato, you'll get lots of potatoes but very small potatoes. However, if you limit your chits to just 2 chits, you'll get less potatoes but really big potatoes. Also, do not plant your potatoes like this. They have to properly cure to plant. If you plant them like this, the plants can harbor disease and fungus. So in order to properly cure the potatoes, just place the potatoes face up on a shelf or a counter and then just let them cure for about a week. After a week, a scab will form on the cut side of the potato, and also on the whole potatoes. We actually cut out the chits of the potatoes as well. And once the scars are properly cured and scabbed over, they're ready to plant outside. So let's go outside and plant them, and I'll cover everything and what kind of growing medium goes into planting potatoes and what kind of fertilizer and other additives you need to plant potatoes.
Now before we plant our potatoes, let's cover when to plant potatoes. Now potatoes don't like temperatures that are too hot or too cold. So potatoes don't like temperatures below 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees Celsius, and they don't like temperature over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 36 degrees Celsius. Now you can plant your potatoes in spring or in fall. When planting your potatoes in spring, plant your potatoes at least 1 week before your last frost, up to 3 weeks after your last frost.
Now in Northern Hemisphere, it's March or April depending on your zone. And in Southern Hemisphere, it's September or October.
The fall or autumn is reversed. You must plant your potatoes at least 3 months before your first frost in fall or autumn, because potatoes take about 3 months to grow to form tubers. So you don't want to get your potatoes plant get stopped out by frost or cold weather.
In Northern Hemisphere, it's August or September depending on your zone. And in Southern Hemisphere, it's February or March.
Now, if you're planting your potatoes in spring, there's one more thing you really need to keep an eye on. Potatoes don't like hot temperatures either, like I mentioned before. So if the temperature goes above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 36 degrees Celsius, the potato plants will be fine and they'll keep growing foliage and leaves. However, they will not make any more potatoes or tubers underground. Now, if you live in a region where it doesn't get too hot, maybe Canada, northern states in the United States, northern Europe, Russia, or even southern New Zealand, you can plant your potatoes all summer long, so it's not going to get over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 36 degrees Celsius. However, if you live in a region where it does get hot, make sure you give 3 months to plant your potatoes before it gets hot. Now I'm in zone 9 and it does get hot here. In summers, it gets up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 40 degrees Celsius. So I start my potatoes in March, about a week before the last frost. That gives my potatoes a good chance to start growing and become big plants and form tubers before it starts to get really hot in summer in July. So I harvest my potatoes by the end of June. Now potatoes come in many different varieties. Now these varieties are either determinate or indeterminate, just like tomatoes. Now what that means is the determinate varieties of potatoes will only grow potatoes or tubers in a single layer where you planted the seed potato. However, indeterminate varieties will keep growing potatoes along the stem of the plants as long as you keep filling it back or keep healing the plants. Now, potatoes love loose soil rich in organic matter, and potatoes love full sun. So select an area in your garden that receives full sun to plant your potatoes. Now let's go plant those potatoes.
Now to plant my potatoes, I use these wooden boxes that are 2 feet by 2 feet. And I make these wooden boxes using redwood fence pickets, and they're very easy and cheap to make. You can also use cardboard boxes to grow your potatoes too. I made a separate video on growing potatoes in 5 different containers, so check that out if you're interested. Now to grow your potatoes, you need loose soil up to 12 inches deep. Now you can achieve that in a raised bed, in a wooden box, or a cardboard box, or you can make berms in an open field. You also need proper spacing to grow really big and huge potatoes. Now the proper plant spacing for growing potatoes should be 12 inches apart, and row spacing should be at least 16 inches apart. Now let's prepare our growing medium, our soil, for growing these potatoes. So I have 2 of these stacked up to give me a little bit more height. Now in order to grow my potatoes, I use 50% native soil, 40% compost, and 10% coconut coir. And that's because I have clay soil. Clay soil is really heavy. So in order to loosen up the soil, I add organic matter, which compost provides. Now if you have sandy soil, You can also add compost to help retain moisture in the soil, because sandy soil drains much faster than clay soil. So no matter what the composition is of your soil, you can just follow this rule. To grow potatoes in these containers or in cardboard boxes, just use 50% native soil, 40% compost, and 10% coconut coir. The first thing we're going to do is add fertilizer to the soil. So I'm using 4x2 organic chicken manure fertilizer, and I use about 1 cup per square feet. Now I use an organic fertilizer. It's a very slow releasing fertilizer and very light fertilizer with NPK ratio of 4:2. So it's very light as considered to other chemical fertilizer, which are 16, 12, something like that. So if you're using chemical fertilizer, you want to use quarter the amount of fertilizer that I added in there. Now to start our potatoes, I'm using fertilizer which is a little high on nitrogen. Now as our potatoes grow, you don't want to feed nitrogen to your potatoes. Nitrogen encourages leafy growth. So at first you want your potatoes to have leafy, nice, bushy growth. But after about a month, you want to focus on your potato plants to create the tubers, the actual potatoes. So you want to switch to a fertilizer that is 168 or 468, something like that. So basically ensuring that you feed a lot more potassium to your potatoes. So the last number, the potassium, is much higher than the first two numbers. Next, I'm using sulfur. Now this helps to lower the pH level of the soil, and I'm using 1 ounce per square feet. Sulfur lowers the pH level of the soil. Potatoes love acidic soil, about 5.5 pH. So if you keep your pH a little bit lower, you will grow a lot of huge potatoes. Now next, I'm using iron phosphate. Now Sluggo also has a brand for this iron phosphate, and this helps to reduce earwigs in your soil, because earwigs will come up and eat your potato leaves. So you want to make sure you reduce the population of earwigs. And now I'm just going to gently mix the top 3 to 4 inches of this soil, and all of this matter is going to percolate down into the soil as we water, so we don't have to mix them too deep. Now this area is 4 square feet, so we'll be planting 4 potatoes in this area, and you want to plant your potatoes at least a wrist deep. So you have to plant your potatoes 6 to 8 inches deep. So let me dig a hole right here, one here, and another one here. And I'm going to drop my potatoes with the chits facing up. So wherever the chits are pointing, we're going to face them up. Next, cover your potatoes and then completely drench the soil with water.
Now, potatoes are fast to grow. You'll start seeing potato plants just 2 weeks after you plant your potatoes. Potatoes will grow no matter what. Just stick the potatoes in the ground and they will grow. This is why potatoes are one of the easiest crops to grow. Now you can also grow potatoes in containers as well. Now you can use the same growing medium, the same mixture that I mentioned before to grow potatoes in containers. Now, when growing potatoes in containers, fill the containers about halfway up. Now this is because when the potatoes start to grow, you can keep adding more soil in the containers, and this will be equal to hilling or mounding the potatoes. Now, indeterminate varieties of potatoes will definitely benefit from filling back the soil in the containers or hilling the potatoes if you plant them in ground. However, determinate varieties also benefit as well because it prevents the potatoes from becoming green. If the potatoes are too close to the surface, they tend to turn green because of photosynthesis, and that creates toxins in the potatoes. So in order to prevent your potatoes from turning green, whether you plant in containers, in ground, or in raised beds, you must fill back the soil or hill the soil, or use leaf mulch or straw mulch to mulch your potatoes plants heavily so that the potatoes don't turn green at all. Now, how much and how often to water your potato plants? Now, potatoes love moist soil. They don't like soil that is too dry, or they don't like soil that is waterlogged either. They love soil that is equal to the consistency of a wrung out sponge. Now, I water my potato plants every 2 to 4 days depending on the temperature. On hotter days, I provide potato plants water every 2 days. On colder days, I go even 3 to 4 days without watering. It's actually better to let your soil dry out just a little bit before watering again. The worst thing you can do is waterlog your soil, and the potato plants will not like it. So let the soil dry up just a little bit before watering again. Now, no matter what, do not water your potatoes from top down. Don't wet the leaves of your potatoes. Always provide water from the bottom, from the root level, and use drip irrigation if possible to water your potato plants. Keeping the leaves of your potato plants dry prevents diseases, especially fungal diseases. Now, there are many other diseases that affect potato plants as well, such as scab, potato blight, and many other diseases. However, if you keep the pH level of your soil low, you keep it acidic around 5.5, they'll prevent a lot of diseases from happening. Now, there are multiple pests that can bother potatoes too. Now, the couple of common pests that bother potatoes are potato beetles and earwigs. For beetles, you can use diatomaceous earth.
In order to get rid of earwigs, use iron phosphate.
After 3 to 4 weeks, potato plants will start to fill up and they'll start to grow further. After 6 weeks, which is about a month and a half after planting, potato plants will completely engulf your containers or your raised beds. This is when they're using the energy of the sun, the photosynthesis, to form tubers underground. After 3 months, the potato plants have grown and the plants will start to topple over or fall down. Now, this is an indication on when to harvest your potatoes. Now, you want to harvest your potatoes when the potato plants have completely fallen down, the leaves are turning yellow, a little bit brownish, and they have fulfilled the purpose of their life. And the plants have already created tubers under the soil. Now, at this point, the plants will no longer make any more tubers, and they will not make the potatoes that are already underground. They won't make it any bigger. So it is time to harvest the potatoes. To harvest the potatoes, first pull the plants, put the plants to the side, and then go with a fork in your ground to dig up the potatoes, or just use your hands. Make sure not to bruise the potatoes. If potatoes are bruised, they will not have very long shelf life. You have to consume them within 3 to 4 days. So be very careful when harvesting your potatoes. And look at these beauties. Look at all of these potatoes, and look at this big one. There are big ones, small ones, and so many different types of potatoes. It's an absolute treasure hunt to harvest potatoes. Involve your entire family in harvesting potatoes and enjoy the process. Now, after you harvest your potatoes, you have to store your potatoes properly to have a long shelf life. Now, when we're creating seed potatoes, we provide warmth, light, and moisture to create our seed potatoes. However, to store our potatoes to have a long shelf life, we have to do the opposite. You have to store your potatoes in a dark, dry, and cold place, such as a root cellar, your garage, or anywhere in your house where you don't get direct sunlight. And always store your potatoes away from your onions, because onions make the potatoes sprout. Now, if you like this video, check out this video on growing potatoes in different containers, and check out this video on an experiment on growing cut potatoes and whole potatoes, and I'll see you in another video.